Sure. And what I would like us to talk about now is the unique value proposition of Discovery Insure. And I think some of the things I would like to touch on is the fire force and the pothole patrol. I keep wanting to say Paw Patrol.
My 4-year-old as well.
Like those unique propositions and that shared value ethos that comes with that. So I just think it's such an interesting thing to unpack, especially for students who don't necessarily see the societal benefits of what actuaries can do. And what insurance companies can do. So if you just speak to that sort of broadly.
No, sure. I mean, so those interesting are actually actuarial problems that we ended up solving in really a unique way. And we'll maybe start with pothole patrol. So really post-COVID, you would have probably remembered there was a real kind of backlog in terms of infrastructure development. Yeah. There were potholes everywhere. And over and above really just the sentiment we saw in the country around potholes. I mean, it's that broken window theory. When you see the things around you being kind of not kept up, you feel quite negative about your environment. Yeah. So we really felt a mood around negativity in Joburg, and more than that, we actually on our claim side ended up seeing an increase in rim and tire claims because of people driving potholes. Okay. Yeah. So we said, well, what is the cost of those claims for us? And what would it cost us to fix them, right? If our clients are reporting them, it's most likely where they're going to be driving. Okay. So if we fix them over and above creating a really great sentiment about what's happening in Joburg, we also save on pothole claims. Yes. And that's really where the concept came about. And it's what we really call shared value. Yeah. We if we invest in kind of making our drivers kind of safer or reduce their risk, they also assist in doing that, and then society also becomes much safer. So that's really where the concept of pothole patrol came about. It ended up extending into an incredible initiative. Yes. About 2 weeks ago, we launched the Pothole Patrol Academy, where essentially we now have 24 learners really funded through a program with the intention that they start their own businesses of repairing roads and partnering with government. Amazing. So like a really actuarial kind of small problem ended up becoming this really powerful initiative, which is amazing. And then Fire Force, I guess, happened in a similar way. About a few years ago, there was actually an arsonist in Johannesburg. Yeah, I know. Crazy. Burning down many houses in the northern suburbs of Johannesburg, really costing the insurance industry millions. Yeah. And we realized, well, if we can maybe respond to that fire a bit quicker, you could potentially save the house from burning down, but importantly save a life. Yes. And we did the exact same equation. We said, well, what is the cost of a house burning down? This is the cost of an initiative. And kind of through that, this concept of Fire Force really started. And a question I often get is, well, aren't you doing the work of the government? Yes, that was going to be my next question. Like, how does that work, given that you're doing sort of that governmental job? Is there not sort of pushback? Exactly. So, I mean, Pothole Patrol specifically very closely with the city of Johannesburg around that. It's endless. The supply is limited of these resources. And if we would you prefer we do nothing? Yes. So it's much more powerful to do something. Yes. And potentially make a small difference. And now it's been really interesting. I mean, my daughters think a fire truck is blue. Yes. But we still obviously respect the city of Joburg, their fire services, and when they're on scene together, there's incredible collaboration. Yes. But it really is an actuarial solution to a problem we saw in the claim space. And when you talk about the Fire Force, do you actually own those fire trucks? No, we don't physically own them, so we have a partnership with a private company that does fire services, and we've really privately branded those. Okay. We've got a close partnership with them. And is that available only to your policyholders? No, so anyone can phone in and report a fire, and they would respond to any fire. Okay, so it's actually more a broader societal benefit than it is just to your book. Exactly. Okay. Yeah, I mean, our client base would probably be the most up-to-date with the initiatives and who to phone if there was a fire. 100%. If anything, probably a Discovery Insure client would phone if their neighbour's house was burning down. Yeah, I got you. Respond to that. Got you. Okay. I'm going to sort of backtrack us to actuarial science, and I think there's a number of things my students ask me, which I think would be really useful to ask you. One thing I would love to ask you is, how do you see the actuarial profession changing? So I think both from maybe 10 years ago and where you see it going in the next 10 to 15 years, obviously with new technologies, etc., and how business is changing, what would be your comments there? Yeah, my first comment would be that I think the Actuarial Society has done an incredible job in really keeping up with the changes in the environment. Yeah. If I just look at at really how the exams were structured 10 years ago to how they are now.
Yeah.
How CPD has kind of transitioned into really meeting people's needs in terms of continuous development. I think they've done a really good job at really keeping up with the changing times. And from what we're seeing, actuaries coming into the workforce are really well equipped in terms of what they know about even kind of AI, data analytics.
Yes.
I think investment in wider fields, like all of that is already happening at a grassroots level. And I think really setting actuaries up and at the same time making sure that the like academic robustness of the core principles are still in place.
Yes. So you understand like your time value of money and those sort of things, which you will never change.
Exactly.
Regardless of AI.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when I'm chatting to guys in interviews coming straight out of varsity and I ask them about these wider issues, it's clear that like they've been talking about that through university.
Yeah.
And I think the actual society is kind of doing the same thing and making sure people are up to speed.
Yeah. I mean, you just touched on interviews. I think another thing, especially my fourth year students, they're always sort of like, how should I set up my CV, like interview practice, what are companies looking for? When you are sitting with a graduate wanting to hire them, what are you looking for in a CV? And what are you looking for from like a more sort of like holistic person perspective, the stuff that you can't see on a CV? What are the things that are core to you?
It's a really good question. So for me personally, when I employ an actuary, it is important for me that there is really academic robustness, especially for technical roles. Then kind of going from there, it is important for me to see that the person I'm employing is the right fit for the role. So, I mean, at Discovery, we have very technical roles for actuary and we have very non-technical roles for actuaries. And then it's important for me to see that if I'm employing you or interviewing you, that you're the right personality for that role. So if you're a kind of very bubbly, non-technical actuary, I'm going to struggle employing you in a valuations role. If that's where I see that you're not going to be happy in a role like that. So for me, it's really important that what I see in the interview and on the CV matches the role that the person is applying for. And that's more about making sure that there's a job fit and that there's job satisfaction. Because actuaries really flourish when they feel challenged and they feel that there's a safe environment to learn. And that's really important for me. From really a university student CV, for me personally, it's nice to see kind of what other hobbies they're interested in.
It's not just like I had this many exemptions.
Exactly, kind of life outside actuarial. And it's a question I often ask people is to say when they're not studying and when they're not working, what do they do?
Sleeping.
Probably sleeping, because it's all consuming initially. But it's just really interesting for me to understand the person behind the CV, right? The person behind the paper. And we employ for culture more than just skill. Like skill is kind of your entry into the interview, but then culture is really important for me because we do believe in teamwork, and we're not in an environment where you're going to be a lone star, right? You're in an environment full of superstars, and that's really important for me. I think humility personally is like another really important attribute.
And teachability, right?
Exactly. Actuarial science is a journey. Kind of post university, you've learned a lot, but you're probably going to learn 10 times more in the next 10 years of your career. So, like, really not the sense of having arrived post-university, but the sense of kind of wanting to learn and wanting to make a real difference.
I think just to link to that, just to sort of double-click, is that if you were sitting with a graduate, let's say I was a graduate wanting a job at Discovery Insure, what would be your tips to me in an interview? So they're like, obviously, there's obviously like be on time, dress appropriately, those sort of things, you know.
The basics.
The basics. But like what, even maybe like a couple of questions that you would ask them, because they're always asking me. And I'm like, I'm not going to employ you. Don't take my word for it, but I think they would take your word for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is, and this sounds so mundane, but really prepare for an interview. An interview is not something that you've prepared for if you've read your own CV. I think the first thing is like go read up about the company, understand its core purpose, understand whether you actually buy into that core purpose, and go read a bit about the results, go read about the industry, understand what the complexities are.
It also gives you some questions, right? If they like, what questions do you have? It shows that you've actually sort of engaged with it.
It reflects really poorly at the end of an interview if I ask you for questions and you don't have any.
It's like, where's the bathroom?
Or I mean, something that's always interesting for me that people ask is what, like, can I leave at 5? Like, is it a stressful job?
Oh, sure.
Is it like going to be 8 to 5, or am I going to have to work after hours? And that's always a really odd question. Like,
yes.
it just comes across negatively, even though it is just really practical.
Yes, it is. But I mean, like in your first interview, it shouldn't be the foremost of your questions.
No, especially when you're coming into a role where you want to learn, you want to grow.
Yes, and you want to give the impression that you actually really want to give your all to this position,
exactly.
Not just sort of like at 5 I'm out.
No, exactly. I mean, so I would rather encourage people to ask around kind of what sort of study support is there,
yes.
To kind of continue actuarial progression.
Yeah.
I think really important to ask, like, what does success look like in the role I'm applying for? Like, what is like a key metric? Like, what are you guys looking for?
It's a great question.
Something I always ask is, tell us about yourself.
Yes, I hate that question though, because it's like, what do you actually want?
Exactly.
Is that a 2-mark question or a 10-mark question?
Exactly. But you have to prepare for that question.
Yeah.
It has to be crisp, concise. You have to bring across kind of a key strength. And like maybe a short bit about your journey, but we don't want to hear that you went to Mauritius on holiday with your family last week.
Yes.
That's not tell us
That's
about.
too much.
That's too much.
That's too much. Yeah.
Like make it like personal enough that we get a sense of who you are, but focus on kind of like what you've learned, what you want to be in this new role, and potentially the value you can add when you arrive.
Yeah, which I think as a graduate, when you don't have that understanding, is quite daunting, because you also are a little bit scared of asking a question that seems stupid.
Completely.
You know, but I guess also, like, if you're earnest, that can also come across well in an interview when you're just sincere. Like, even if it is a question like super basic, it's like, well, definitely. At least you asked it, you know?
Yeah, and I think importantly, if you ask something where you say, I mean, I read this in your financials. I thought,
what does it mean?
What does it mean?
Yeah.
Like, what? I read that in CT4. I'm not seeing kind of how that applies here. Yeah. And remember, people understand that we're interviewing a graduate, potentially. That,
yes.
Who
They're not expecting you to be a qualified.
Experience.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not expecting you to be a fellow with work experience.
Yeah.
That interview looks very different.
Yeah.
Compared to a grad.
Agreed. But also, I mean, the level of responsibility you would be given there would be very different.
And that's exactly it.
Would be very different.
It's a journey.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, very, very interesting to think through those. But one of the comments you made earlier is you said there was a set of actuarial skills that you have used throughout your career, and you like flippantly said VLOOKUP, right? which is great. But like, what other skills would you say were key to you in almost every role that you've been in, albeit that those have been varied? But what role, like what sort of those actuarial key skill sets have you taken throughout?
Sure. So I'd say a real golden thread is everything I learned in CT1.
Okay.
And it sounds really...
So that's a financial maths.
Yes. Like really simple, but in terms of time value of money...
Did Steve teach you that?
Steve taught me that in 2008. But that really is just so fundamental.
Yeah.
In terms of understanding kind of the net present value of certain projects, understanding internal rate of return, kind of shareholder return. That is just a golden thread kind of throughout the corporate career. Then the things, I mean, I mentioned write-off triangles, that all fits in really well with kind of the reserving teams and things that I've been in. And at the moment, ironically, the critical skill is communications.
Sure. Which everyone hates.
But it ends up being probably something that can set you apart compared to your peers.
Yeah.
If you can communicate very well to a non-actuarial audience and make sure you get the right message across.
Yes.
And that's a real skill.
Without being patronizing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in the way you write an email to your manager, the way you write an email to a CEO, the way you communicate kind of verbally to an audience, and people take it lightly. But I mean, I encourage people to, even while they're at university, to look at their lecturers who they believe are really good teachers
and try to make out what it is that
how they communicate.
What makes them good?
Yeah. And try to apply that to kind of everything they do.
Yeah.
I mean, eventually, like later on in a corporate career, I mean, the thing you do the most is probably email and speak to people.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I'm sure now in your role, communication must be like 80% of what you do, if not more.
That's exactly it. So it's crystallizing messages down to really the key points, bringing it across, and like getting people to buy into what you're doing.
I think one of my last questions to you would be, what advice or encouragement would you give to an aspiring actuary? Also considering that obviously you were there, 15 years ago. What do you wish that you had known? Or like something, just think of that kind of face, if that makes sense, and give a piece of encouragement there.
Yeah, I'd say the first thing is that